Now going backwards.
Wow.
When I first bought this machine, I lost a whole side of tape because I didn't realize it had done that. It's done.
They gave me 10 lessons on a borrowed guitar from the downtown community school, which later, coincidentally, was run by Eileen Tate Klein, who has been a member of the board of directors of the Folk Alliance recently. Maybe still is. And who I knew at Oberlin later. Anyway, took 10 lessons, and it seemed to take, and I was playing it this way, right-handed strung.
Okay, upside down. Yeah.
That they made the additional payment to buy the guitar, and they asked around, they took me to Frank D'Amato, who taught guitar downtown. So I did my dun 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 ching ching dun ching. He said he would take me on, but he would suggest that I reverse the strings, which I did, and I took a little more than a year, some guitar lessons with him. Meanwhile, I was learning songs. I learned the Weaver songs from 51, 52, 50, 51. I was leading on top of Old Smoky, like Pete led the Weavers and Terry Gilkison on the 1951 hit. And a friend of mine, Bob Popper, also played some guitar, and we'd get together, friends, and just sing, and then go out for an Abitz. Didn't have pizza in New Haven, they had Abitz.
What's an
A-P-P-I-Z-A. A-P-I-Z-Z-A. Abitz. That's the way they
Okay,
spelled it.
yeah.
And I never heard the word pizza until I think it's based on La Pizza. L-E, the article, P-I-Z-Z-E is one Italian spelling. Anyway, ends up sounding like that. But the clincher was I went to Oberlin fall of 53, and I just got down the hall, not only with a guitar, but in this case was the latest issue of Sing Out and the People's Songbook. And then at my dorm where I ate was Carol and Epstein. It's the same thing, and they had they were up in New York City. And they had all these great songs. Hey John, Koya, hey John, Billy, hey John. If the price of meat grows higher, Mayor William F. O'Dwyer will not have a leg to stand upon. His reports as they issue will write on toilet tissue, flush them down to John, John, John. Of course, everybody from New York, the folk scene, knew what that was a parody of.
Okay.
Anyway, and then but it was still a kind of a residual thing. I was in the Gilbert and Sullivan and stuff like that. Then my sophomore year, I got into one of the 2 student co-ops, where you didn't have to wear a tie. For dinner, you did all your own cooking with a part-time help of one cook. And you coordinated the jobs and all these jobs. I was really into that, and I managed to be drawn into that same co-op for 3 years. Well, my sophomore year, I met, maybe I had already met a senior named Steve Toller, who was from New York and played a little banjo. And his parents had been with the American Square Dance Group, Margot Mayo. And he, being kind of an entrepreneurial guy, had set up the concession on campus selling folk music records. And he had a radio show on WOBC, the voice and choice of Oberlin College, all 10 watts. And so I started buying records from him, and he and others, Gray Gables, and to some extent Pile Inn across the street, but particularly Gray Gables, we would just, people I meet now say, Joe, I don't remember you studying. You're always sitting around the lounge with your guitar with Gray Gables. I've got photos to prove it. And then we just sang, and on the overnight train ride to New York City, we'd get one into a car and just sing these songs. Freiheit. G.K. Duncan's and Fry, Pete Boggs, so it was always nice, calm songs there. So I was picking up records from Steve, and we became very, very friendly. I ended up being his best man.
You're still through the mid-50s.
This
right?
is my sophomore year was 54, 55.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, he graduated and passed the mantle on to me. I got the record business. I was a rep for all the record companies in the United States, commercial record companies that specialize in folk music. How many? 3.
Folkways, Riverside.
Stinson. Oh, not Riverside. No. Stinson and Electra.
Okay.
turned out the lecturer was Jack Holtzman, who was the older brother of Jack Holtzman, who was in my class at Oberlin.
Okay.
And then I would pick up on Riverside and Prestige and Arhoolie, either in person, living in New Haven, I would always, then I took the business to IU and added Delmark and Audio Fidelity and Folk Lyric. I would just contact them or go visit them, Tradition, and then I'd have a big catalog that sold all these records. I would get orders and then order them and sell them. I did some mail order too. And I got the radio show, and then I had a radio show at IU. And then another thing happened at Oberlin was that Pete Seeger came my freshman year, very crucial, February '54, and he has cited this in print. And once I did an oral history interview sort of him at Mariposa in '74 to a small audience of about 1,500. I managed to get a few questions in, and one of them was about the Oberlin experience. And he said he waxed about that first concert at Oberlin really was a benchmark in his career. See, after the Weavers couldn't sing anymore by the end or the beginning of '52, because the Sweeter Than Wine was their last hit. It was a minor hit, but by then they were blacklisted. Pete tried to make it as a musician, solo. And well, he kept busy, but it was New York City, or what I would call the Northern City radical axis, and certain spin-offs, direct spin-offs to certain colleges and universities like Swarthmore, Cornell, that were close. And a lot of these, I mean, some of the cases would be some money, and others weren't much money, and some of them were benefits, right? You know, Pete.
Yeah.
And he had built his house in Beacon, and he was trying to raise a family. And so Mike Horowitz and Ken Seiden, who at that time were juniors, when I was a freshman, '53, '54, persuaded Pete to drive out to Oberlin, this wasteland in the hinterlands of northern Ohio, guaranteed him $100. They were nervous. He was nervous. It was in the Allen Art Building auditorium, and it managed to just about fill it, almost 200 people. I think $1 a ticket. They broke even. The next year, Pete came to the new Hall Auditorium, Hall, it used to call it, and there were 500 people. A beautiful tape of it, almost issued. My junior year, 750 people. My senior year, over 1,000 people came to see Pete Seeger. And I was a college town of 2,000, a college population of 2,000, a town at 5,000. People were coming from all over. Bill Crowfoot came over to visit from Allegheny College to visit his girlfriend, who dragged him to the Pete Seeger concert. Became a folk musician. So that was quite an impetus, quite a growth. It still was kind of, you know, the word beat didn't come into the vocabulary until right after I graduated in summer of '57. We were the Bohemians at those two co-ops and another dorm where a lot of theater people were. We were the Bohemians on campus. So most people's exposure to folk music was non-existent still, or the Pete Seeger concerts. Pete Seeger even was invited out to the retreat, the annual fall retreat, you know, a weekend before school started, of the Ys, the student Ys, YMCA, YWCA. I got to campus and I found out he'd just been there, and I didn't know anything about it because I wasn't in the Ys, I wasn't the Y type. I was like hopping mad. I would have joined. Come on. I would have paid my $5. Anyway. So in my senior year, we did two things. We formed the Folksmiths. You know, Pete was, you know, everywhere Pete went in the college campuses, you started getting these trios, quartets, quintets, and so on and so forth. In addition to the usual places like New York City and Chicago and San Francisco and Los Angeles, Detroit. And we created the Folksmiths, and we spent that summer after I graduated. We made a record for Moash at the end of the summer. First record ever published in the world to contain Kumbaya, it turns out. Also, we founded the Oakland Folk Song Club. I was the first president, and that was to make folk music more visible, give it an authorized spot on the campus with a faculty advisor. Simone Barenbaum, a new French professor whose wife played guitar and sang folk songs. And it was to sponsor concerts, bring in outside people, and to sponsor informal activities around the various dorms. Come to the folk sing Friday night at such and such.
Now, in that era, and given that you were young, how much hashing out did you do of, well, what repertoire do we present? What types of people do we present? What is folk music? Did you go through any of that?
We were soaking up every little new song was something new. And of course, it was limited.
You got to know what fits. Happy Traum once said to me, "Oh, I was bored by all that stuff, but I defined a folk song as whether or not Pete Seeger sang it. If he did, it was." That was the story for me.
Well, he certainly was an influence, so much so that a little while later, in the late 50s, when Mike Seeger and others showed us that, well, there are other ways to play the banjo, and these seem to be more based on more authentic models, that there was, for a number of individuals, there was a backswing, a reaction to Pete Seeger. Oh, well, he's good, and but maybe there are other things that might be a little more worthwhile. And some people couldn't stand Pete Seeger because he wasn't whatever.
Yeah.
Too eclectic, too this or that. Anyway, the first concert we sponsored from outside performer was February '57. Was young Bob Gibson, who told the Folksmiths when the Folksmiths asked him about repertory because we were going to go teach songs at summer camps that summer. He said, "When in doubt, sing John Henry." So at that Royce conference,
yes, he
and Mimi performed. And actually, they spoke. They were great on panels. But that Thursday night, they at some local coffee house or something, a bar, they performed. I went up to Bob, and I said, "Bob, I hope you're not going to sing John Henry." He said, "I hadn't planned to. Why?" Well, he says, "It just shows me that you have no doubts." Well, I had to explain it to him.
How much of this was tied up with politics with you? Pete obviously had a political situation going on.
Well,
How much of it came
I came from a mild left-wing background.
Okay, I was wondering what your parents were.
I mean, they had Paul Robeson
records.
records.
Those records. There must have been some politics.
Yeah, they had. Oh, yeah. And they had. The funny thing was, they had "Ballad for Americans" album, but it was by Frank Sinatra or Bing Crosby. One of those. I don't know why
I
they
think
didn't
Frank
have Paul.
did.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't have the Paul. But they had one or two albums of Paul Robeson and the Red Army Chorus. Then the general stuff like Carl Sandburg.
Were they political workers or just mild sympathizers?
No, my father was. My mother was active in Russian war relief. That was during World War II. My father wrote a Marxist a dissertation on education from some Marxist standpoint for doctoral dissertation at NYU, I guess it was.
Did he teach or write as a career?
Yeah, he was an educator at the New Haven State Teachers College. I'd be very careful because as kids we always called it New Haven Strange Creatures College. He was during World War II. He helped develop the first child care program in the United States, modeled after Russia. All the parents are in the factories or off to war who have organized care for kids. So he did that in New Haven. And teacher training, he was head of that, and then head of the education department. And he wrote a book and other things on the teaching of mathematics. That was one special. He had a television program. Yeah. Wrote columns. And he was active in one of the organizations that led to or was sort of part of the Progressive Party campaign of '48. Wallace and Taylor in '48. Which is the first time I saw Pete Seeger, and the only time I saw Paul Robeson. Went to the arena in New Haven, big rally. And Pete, the only thing I remember of Pete in 1948 was It seemed like the louder he sang, the more vigorously he stamped his foot. And Paul Robeson held his hand over his ear when he sang. My father, I remember my father thought it was because he had an ear infection. But it might have been for tone, because it is an international phenomenon. I mean, it's not just you and McCall saying. So
you're
and
getting
they
music-
subscribed to The Guardian, which was a left wing.
So you're getting music, you're getting politics. Did you make a connection between the two when you were in college? Did you say,
Oh yeah,
this music
because a lot of
is-
these people.
This
I mean,
music is a political project.
Yeah, and it was. It seemed to me that except for John Jacob Niles and Richard Darman and a few performers, it seemed like most people involved with folk music had some kind of left-wing
Right.
political background. All those kids from New York,
Yeah.
it's sort of part. Even the American Square Dance Group, which was apparently not particularly political at all, certainly had a lot of the same people who would go there and cut their teeth on.
You know, Izzy Young claims that it was years before he knew that folk music had anything to do with politics. I've never gotten him to deviate from that. He insists that he never knew.
Well, I'll tell you, my Aunt Valerie used to go to the Woodlands Resort, which is very close to Camp Woodland. In fact, parents would go there, but she used to go there because it was kind of a left-wing. People would go there for the summer vacation. And Tom Paley worked there one time, never was at the camp visit. I swear that she told me that Izzy Young taught square dancing there. And Izzy claims he doesn't remember that. Well, maybe not.
Did you go to summer camps? Did you go to the left-wing summer camps at all?
No, I never. See, New Haven I had no sense of any folk scene, venue, or community at all. None whatsoever. Absolutely none whatsoever. It was all kind of secondhand. I didn't know about New York City. I didn't know about People's Song. I didn't know about the new Sing Out.
Right.
Nothing, no, until I got to Oakland
Okay.
in the fall of '53. My few excursions in the summer camp, which started much too young when I was 5, I hated. I was sick most of the time, probably self-inflicted, so I didn't have to go in the water. And so I didn't do much of summer camps. But then in graduate school, I was on the staff at Camp Woodland for 2 years, 59 and 60. I loved it, being a counselor. Actually, the second year I was in charge of folk music. And I taught tennis and I led hikes. I mean, the best part of the hike to be is going up the mountain with no little feet in front of you. Teaching tennis, I enjoyed that. And I do 7 hours of folk music every day. I used to keep track of the pop charts, a long scroll that maps the pop records from late '49 up to the mid-'50s. It was time I was turned off to pop music and I ran out of paper. So I did that at camp in 1960. Each bunk compiled their top 10. And I made a top 10 for the camp. Top 5 or something like that. Donna, 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 Virgin Mary had a little baby. Donny Gal. Where have all the flowers gone? Which I had just made up the last 2 verses for. Partly, I mean, Pete Seeger.
You get a royalty for that, by the way?
Yes. Pete Seeger, yeah, thanks to Harold Leventhal and Pete, very conscientious. I don't know what proportion was it. Anyway, I got this record. Every Pete Seeger record I got. See, by the time I was a disc jockey and working for the companies, I could get, tradition I got everything free. 1 or 2 companies. Most companies I could get them for $1, new releases. Folkways $2. But every Pete Seeger record I got.
Yeah.
They came out with this one called Rainbow Quest, half of which was short songs and fragments. And the 3-verse thing of Where Have All the Flowers Gone. And I was singing a lot in the coffee house, and the Phase 3 Sub A, and Bloomington, and at parties. We were always singing at parties. And I started singing that, and people were harmonizing when you get to the 3rd verse and repeat it over and over again. You know, because we were so into singing it. And then one night, I sort of vaguely remember I was after singing it, walking half a block to the bakery where we could go and get absolutely, totally freshly made donuts, which you could smell from outside before they even went on the market. I think it was when I was walking with my girlfriend. Anyway, I sang it. No, Pete Seeger that summer of '60 came to Camp Woodland. He always came once a year. And he was tuning up his banjo on the porch of the big mess, the big mess hall where everybody was, all the campers were sitting there waiting for him. And one of the CITs was keeping them occupied with their guitar and folk songs. And he started singing "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" And Pete had forgotten about that song. He worked on it. He said, "Oh." And then they get to the fourth verse. He takes out an envelope like Lincoln and writes those stuff. I was writing these words down. And, I told him about it. And the kids had added another verse, "Where have all the people gone? The bomb has killed them, everyone." That didn't quite fit into the circle, so I never sang that. That was a little too vivid for me. But, it was left-wing kids,
Were you politically active beyond the singing and the consciousness?
Well, in graduate school, I joined the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and marched once or twice. Not terribly, no, not particularly.
What was your take on the Kingston Trio when they surfaced in folk music?
Well, I was going to, let me just finish the flowers thing.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, next thing I knew, I was back at school in the fall of '60, and I get a call from Harold Leventhal. Now, they had copyrighted another song that I had done some additions or changes to that Pete had learned from me, and then the Kingston Trio did, called Bonnie, Elin, Laddie. And so he calls up, I was studying for something, and said, "The Kingston Trio want to record 'Where Have All the Flowers Gone' with your verses." I didn't even ask, how the hell did you find out that? We'll copyright for you, is that okay? We'll send, sure. I didn't know. They didn't teach you about copyright in grad school. And so I started getting royalties, and I bought a car used. Anyway, the story I didn't learn till later when Bob Shane and Nick Reynolds wife came to the archive about 3 years ago. They wanted to talk about donating Kingston Trio stuff. And I knew they were coming, so I had to print out page and page of print out of all the recordings and stuff like that from the computer, and then from the copyright catalog, and then I had some of a couple of the folios that came out with their LPs. The third one had Bonnie, Elin, Laddie, and I showed them that. No, it was because Nick Reynolds said, "Joe Hickerson, that name's familiar." So I showed him that. He said, "Oh, I remember that song," and they started singing the chorus of Bonnie, Elin, Laddie. And then I show him one of the few printings of "Where Have All the Flowers Gone" that has my name, but most of them don't at all.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh yeah, which verses did you write?" I said, "The fourth and the fifth." And Nick Reynolds said, "Thank you." And I said, "Thank you."
Yes. So I gather, well, I don't know. I mean, what was your take on them when they hit?
Oh, the
folk
Kingston
music was
Trio.
suddenly a huge
Well,
deal.
we had a trio at Bloomington that year.
Yeah, you
My
were
first
the
year.
Folksmiths, for goodness sake.
No, the Folksmiths was past. That was just
Yeah,
for the summer.
you'd already done it when.
Right. So I came to IU, and Bruce Buckley, who was the dean of folklore students there, and he already had a 10-inch LP out on folklore.
Was Dorson there then?
Dorson arrived the same week that I did.
Okay.
Bruce Buckley had been a student there for a while and hadn't done his dissertation, but had worked himself up to a full-time job in the audiovisual department. But he had a radio show that went all over the state, and he had a television program that went all over the state. So he was well known, and he was the guy who had the party for all the new students and the old timers, right at the beginning of the new semester.
Right. We had that here in September.
Yeah, right. And Bruce, the year before, maybe the year before that, had set a kind of a quartet or trio quartet of shifting client membership called the Settlers.
Uh-huh.
And when I arrived, it was him and Shelby Thompson, a girl, and Bob Black, who was a veteran of the New York City scene. And of course, Alan Steckert arrived the same time I did. And of course, Alan had 3 LPs out, or was on 3 or 4 LPs, and another one coming with Mel Hoken. So Bruce kind of pushed Shelby aside and said, "Alan, would you like to join us?" And after a while, "Joe, would you like to join us?" And there was a quartet, and then Bob was sort of slipped down. It was a trio. And I don't remember doing this, but we made an audition tape. And Bruce was telling me about this. I hadn't seen him in a long time. He was reminiscing about this, and it may have been the first time I met Ken Goldstein. We may have done it. No. Ellen was an old friend of Kenny's, and we went to visit him. And Long Island, we must have done it in Bloomington. I don't know who Bruce was going to send it to. But one of the songs was Tom Dooley, because we were all singing Tom Dooley. And right then, Tom Dooley came out.
Yeah.
Sold a couple million. So, okay, there's that other little thing about when a song becomes real popular. It slips from the repertory. Well, there was kind of a bitterness there on Bruce's part. It was kind of slipped over to us, I guess. We make millions of dollars off this stuff. And we never got anything. It was the Settlers, and it only lasted that year. I don't think it. And Ellen and I did some concertizing together. And then Ricky came along, we did concert. Anyway, when a song became popular that was in the New York City, the folk scene repertory.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, Linda Snyder from Brooklyn was an undergraduate at Oberlin, maybe a year younger or 2 years younger than I was. In 55 or 6, Monty Donegan's million seller of Rock Island 9 Skiffle. She apparently had just heard it. She came running into the lounge at Grey Gables, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They've taken Rock Island 9 away from us. What will they take next? Midnight Special?" No, it was Tom Dooley. But, when the song became so well known, we just stopped singing it. I haven't sung. I've started singing Kumbaya again, but that's because I have parody verses.
Yes, you see, man, that's appropriate because people think it's a joke.
Right.
But the style of Tom Dooley didn't offend you?
Oh,
you
well,
took
yes. Throughout history.
Yeah.
Well, one of my standard lectures for years has been on aspects of the folk revival and other usages of folk music.
Uh-huh.
And I have the tape made up of different pieces, before and after and middle sometimes.
Right.
Well, I've got 5 examples for Tom Dooley, which I think was the first one I did up maybe 35 years ago. And I really should do it over because I started with Frank Prophet, but it's the later recording. I didn't have access to the 1941 recording. And actually, he was recorded before that by Frank C. Brown, but not that song. And he played the guitar and sang it very fast. So banjo, then the Frank Warner recording from the early 50s, and then a recording to demonstrate that it had caught on in the New York City folk scene and presumably elsewhere. A recording of the Folk Say Trio on Stinson. This was a pickup group that sang on Oscar Brand's radio show and in Greenwich Village, consisting of 3 young men, Roger Sprung, Bob Carey, and Eric Darling.
And the song was sung in Washington Square, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
By them and others. And they kind of romp around, and Roger Sprung was the first Scruggs picker in New York City. So he does a couple of rudimentary Scruggs licks. And they kind of roused him. And of course, by that time it had been published in Folk Song USA. And the rest is history. The Hickerson Trio. Okay, they told me, or Nick told me, I visited Nick and his wife Leslie in Coronado off of San Diego a few months later. But anyway, at some point he told me where they learned it. They were auditioning for that place in that club in San Francisco, and Hungry Eye. I was going to say the Purple Onion, but that's something else. Hungry Eye. And there was some other guy, he said an older guy with white hair, who sang that song, and they liked it, so they picked it up. So he didn't know who that was.
But Jeff Warner, Frank Warner's son, I don't know, maybe this is just the connection. He just always refers to that execrable version by the Kingston Trio, and
Oh yeah, because they were involved with a lawsuit.
Yeah, and that's
Because
what
of
you-
Alan Lomax.
That's what
Alan
you
Lomax
sense it
lawyers.
is, yeah.
Well, not just because, I mean, because, well, yeah, right. And it was settled out of court, and most things that are settled out of court from then on.
Yes, I know. So
The
the
big
Kingston
bucks have
Trio
been
got the
made.
royalties after the hit had faded, yeah.
Right.
From the earlier period.
Yeah, it got divided three ways after
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Frank Pocket, Frank Warner, Alan Lomax, publisher.
But I gather that what the Kingston Trio was doing wasn't particularly offensive to you. I mean, you were doing similar type things yourself, finding songs.
No,
where
but there was always that little jealousy, you know. kind of.
Yes.
But I couldn't get really into that because I had my day activity, which is being a student.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and when I saw, you know, people my age making records, well, I was on a record too soon, making records for Kenny, right and left before they should, you know, on some theme or other. And then trying to make it, I had decided, without much serious thought, I don't remember ever having serious conversations with anybody as to whether I would try to make it. I just knew that I wouldn't. I just knew. I was kind of stuck. I've always been staying in the same place type of guy. So there I was. I went undergraduate to graduate school because that's what you did.
Yeah.
And I stuck around there even after my courses were done. I was working at the archive there and have radio shows, doing concerts, till I was asked to apply for a job at the library.
Yeah.
Ray Corson, who I had visited, knew me, and I had actually done some volunteer work because Phil Kennedy, my roommate, had the job at reference library for 1 year and used to call me up.
Yeah.
Problem. So I sent little tapes and
Right.
tell them where to find songs. So AFS was meeting at the Library of Congress in Washington, '62, and I was there. So I went in to see Ray, because we were friends. He said, well, we have an opening representative, and how would you like to apply? Here's the job description form. I hadn't thought yet. I mean, I'm applying for jobs. So I did. Arranged to start work on it at the end of the semester.
What music do you like? What do you listen to? Are you a bluegrass fan, an old-timey fan, a blues fan, a ballad? What do you listen to?
Well, I don't listen to much at home from CDs or records, except when my son visits. I let him play whatever he wants. He's taken some stuff. He found my 45s one day, and I told him there's a radio show. And he knows stuff. I mean, it's amazing. He can listen to anything that just sounds like rock to me. And he said, well, that's 1973, 4. You know, these people who used to be those people. You know,
How old is he?
He's 31.
Okay, yeah, he grew up through that, sure.
Right,
And you
right.
knew it intuitively then, I mean, yeah.
On the radio, I used to wake up to classical music, but they changed that to talk.
Yeah.
So frequently I will listen to, during that time, Music of Your Life, big band. So the station that plays that. When I get into the 60s or something later, but you know, stuff I grew up with. And thought I had given up for folk music, but you know. And then in the afternoons, you know, WAMU has lots of bluegrass programs. And it's stained glass bluegrass. I could never do that show. I could never say that. Stained glass bluegrass. Especially after a Saturday night party, 6 o'clock in the morning. They do it. Whatever. Anyway, every day there's some bluegrass programming at WAMU. Occasionally I listen to Mary Cliff, Traditions on WETA on Saturday nights. Sometimes old-time radio on WAMU Sunday nights.
Did you ever become a 60s
And Dick
rock?
Spotswood show, plays this Moldy Fig stuff.
Right. Did you ever become a 60s rock fan?
No. I couldn't stand Elvis.
Yeah.
When Elvis first came out, it was funny, I had a job at $1 a month or $2 a month at the WOBC because the program, our station director was the son of somebody my mother had gone to college with. He was a couple years older, so I came along. Got the job as record librarian. And all these disc jockeys were into jazz or classical, right? And all these kids. And, I ended up with a lot of, not to be sold for commercial purposes, records in my collection. And for a while I was programming the top 10 of the week for freshman disc jockeys who wanted to be on the radio. They had to do this. A friend like David Sweetie couldn't stand it. Says, here's a record by some weird birds called the eagle, the penguins, Earth Angel. So I was working as a reference librarian in my sophomore year. I would open all the mail, all the demo copies, and the promo copies, and the sheets that came along with it. I got the package from Victor that particular day, opened it up, and there were 6 recordings just out. These are in 45 format by this time. And information about each you could talk about. And a contest for all radio stations, all, big or small, directors, record librarians, and program managers. 6 records. List in what order they would be popular 6 weeks from then, and approximately how many copies would they have sold. Well, I submitted my answer, and I won, I think, 8th nationally.
Oh.
The guy I grew up with listening to on WELI New Haven came in 12th.
Jesus.
I got a Bell & Howell 8mm silent color movie camera, and I sold to a friend of mine for $30, which of course was all the money in the world. I'd like to 54 or 5. And I think the first Elvis was among them. No, I could never.
Now Elvis.
I've had to grow to like the Beatles. So no, I didn't. There were 2 times though I had a car radio. One in my latter years at Bloomington, so that would be the 61, 62, 63. And then when I lived in Accokeek, I commuted. That was 18.5 miles. So that was 65 to 70. And also I used to record concerts for the Washington Star, the other major newspaper besides the Post, because Irving Lowens, who was chief music critic, who also worked at the Library News Division, was far more, he was radical background, far more eclectic and good as a critic than Paul Hume was at the Post. And one of the reasons why Paul Hume was known was because he wrote a bad review of Margaret Truman, and Harry Truman sent him a letter saying that if he ever met him, he would punch him in the eye. Hey, good credentials, right? For both president and reviewer. Anyway, I went, even songs that I was organizing for FSCW, I'd say, how about there's Joe Heaney's over from Ireland. Fine. But he had me reviewing some country shows and some rock concerts in the Constitution Hall and the roller rink. Where I reviewed The Who, where the head persons would light smudge pots behind the big amp.
Yes.
In Constitution Hall. Dave Clark 5 with their strobe lights jumping around. And then at the roller rink there was a double bill. And those were exasperatingly loud for me. Except I found that they put me as a reviewer like in the real up front. And as I walked around, I found that the sound was it was louder back here than it was there. But, and I noticed when Alan Jabbour came to work for the library as head in '69, the record player there, and he tended to play stuff louder than I would have played. Even, he's a little bit younger than I am, but I've never. But people just got more used to loudness. Yeah. But on the radio, you could adjust that and you could understand what they were singing. Another case, I got a free ticket, 2 free tickets to Bob Dylan at the 930 Club about 2 years ago. And I go way up there, it was a great place for people watching. Standing room only, no seats. And he came on with his, cowboy, this not sequined, very nice light suit and his cowboy hat, and then proceeded to do a bunch of songs. And I had no idea what the hell he was singing.
Yes.
And Kathy, my ex-wife, who was with me, drove me there, has an ear problem. She couldn't take it more than 45 minutes, so we left. So the next day I'm talking to Ron Rados, my old friend who used to write radical articles for Sing Out, and then went to the other side as a historian, and is a consummate Bob Dylan fan. He just talks about the time when he was an undergraduate in Madison, and Bob Dylan almost slept on his floor.
Did you know
He says, "Oh, you were only there for 45 minutes. You missed his acoustic set." And then he starts to list me every single. He's written down every single song, and some of the ones that when I was there, I would have recognized.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd heard. But I could not
Make them out.
for the life of me. I couldn't make them
Did you know Barry Olivier, who did the Berkeley Folk Festival for many years?
out. I met him once. I finally met him that time that I was at Freight and Salvage.
Okay.
He was no longer particularly active in anything.
Yeah.
It was some sort of benefit or some special concert, and I happened to be in the area, and I probably went with Faith 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maine was there.
He teaches guitar now, and he's so filled with bookings. It's hard to see him for anything.
Oh, as a guitar
As a teacher,
Oh,
yeah,
great.
yeah. He started that festival. He was telling me once as a strictly traditional festival. His only exception being Pete Seeger, because Pete was exempt from all rules and could kind of go in any world.
Yeah.
And by the end of the '60s, which was the last years he had it, he was booking, and it was still called the Berkeley Folk Festival, and he was now booking Jefferson Airplane and Janis Joplin, and he said...
Country Joe and the Fish.
Country Joe and the Fish, certainly, but Joe was had been a folkie at least, and a red diaper
Right.
baby. But my favorite, a band called Red Crayola, which was an avant-garde rock band in the 1960s. They never made it big. Did you have a take on that as to whether or not that was just sort of riding the wave of the label folk, or was it legitimate in any way?
Legit. I don't know, but I do know that
69,
when
yeah.
folk had become real big, and then bluegrass festivals and Union Grove fiddle took off with thousands of people
Right.
as an alternative to going to Fort Lauderdale over Easter weekend.
A lot of
Thousands
drunken
people
kids, yeah.
congregate at Union Grove, a town of 380, for their Easter little benefit fiddle convention for the little room school or something like that. And the Van Hoy brothers, of course, have a schism as a result. And Frank goes off and starts Fiddler's Grove, or they have Union Grove convention, Fiddler's Grove, but you start seeing these ads. There are certain promoters who would throw every adjective in the book into the name of their festival. I mean, you could do almost a first annual folk, rock, pop, love, hate, war, peace, blah, blah, blah festival. And Pete Kuykendall is an old friend of mine, the editor of Bluegrass Unlimited. We had been back and forth compiling our complimentary annual festival list in the early 70s. He called me up, it was about that time, I guess. He said there was some promoter who had put on 2 or 3 of these gigantic things, and Pete was hearing from friends of his who were musicians about the terrible treatment, no pay, a lot less pay than they were supposed to get, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he says the guy sends in that full-page ad, he sends in the money, he can't not accept it unless he has a valid reason. So could you have a listen to the people he's listing who will be there? And he lists a bunch. And then he says, under tentative, and he goes, blah, 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 blah. And I said, what was that? He said, Eddie Peabody. I said, hold on, Punch. Dial the music division desk down the hall. Hey, Bill, look in your necrology there. They keep a necrology.
Yeah, I knew you were going there. When did he die?
You have to have Eddie Peabody, comma, Eddie. Yeah, he died 4 years ago. Yeah, thanks, Punch. Yeah, he died 4 years ago. Get the Ouija board out.
How would you we should think about what we're going to do the rest of the afternoon.
What time?
It's 1:15, and I've got to be